Hi, welcome to the fourth part of this series on me building this epic board. As you can see, everything is finished. The buildings are all done, the board's all done, and we're going to tackle in this one how I went about finishing off all the roads, how I did these recessed areas that are like storm drains that have been abandoned, how I did this crater, and just cap everything off. So hope you enjoy. Okay, it's time to tackle the roads. So I've got a couple of different ways of doing this without making a mess. I'm going to be painting them black and then doing a light grey dry brush over the top. So I've got my paint and water, etc. I'm going to use a flat edge brush so that I can run it up along the side of the pathway and not get any of the black on the path. If you're really worried, you could mask it off, but that's actually quite a lot of hassle to do it across all these board pieces and would take ages. Other alternative is to get a scrap of card and just hold it up against the edge so that when you're running the brush along, you don't get any paint on here. But I think it's going to be straightforward enough to control the brush with one of these nice flat brushes without getting it everywhere, and then you can just fill in the middle nice and quickly. So let's see how that goes. Okay, it's dried to a nice flat black, but it actually starts to look a little plain. So I think what it needs now to make it look a little bit more like asphalt is a dry brush. So I've got my light grey colour here, and I'm going to go straight from black to light grey because I'm really not going to put a lot on, and I want it to really catch the tops without making the road look grey. So I'm not going to brush off tons. I've got a nice wide brush, and I'm just going to very gently dry brush in a few different directions, trying to avoid streaking, which I've got a little bit of there, so I need to get a little bit more paint off the brush. And just a light dry brush over just to change the tone. And if you're going to dry brush and you get the odd streak, I'm doing it in the direction that the traffic would travel to kind of minimize it looking out of place. So I'll just go over this whole piece and just add a little bit more life to it. Right. Finished here. Pro tip, don't use a brush that you like because dry brushing sandpaper absolutely trashed most of the bristles on this thing. Next up, I'm going to deal with some scatter pieces. I've got some craters to make to kind of break up the roads a little bit, and then I'll be doing the recessed areas in here. Okay, and here we're going to put an insert into here. This is always supposed to be a recessed space to house this little 3D printed, what looks like a tray, but once put in there and filled with some resin will look like a storm drain type kind of thing. And I've textured it with a trick that I'm going to come to after this, but what I need to do first is cut this out. And the reason this is going to be really easy is because I can just use a hobby knife, this is a retractable blade knife, and make some cuts here and along the front. And once I'm cut through the cork on top, I can probably just peel this off. And it's a simple cut through the polystyrene underneath to make the hole. Right, it took a bit of effort to pull it out because of how well stuck down it was with that Gator polyurethane glue, but then this is printed to fit, so it should just slot straight in. There we have it. So now it looks like a little ripped recess. When two pieces butt up against each other, it will cause like a bridge between the two parts of the sewer, and I'm going to pour some ganky looking green resin in there. Right, so I've got some channels to recess into the board, and I've 3D printed like these little pieces that sit inside the board where I've cut out the gap that you saw, but I wanted to get a good concrete texture. So this is my test piece, and you can see that at the scale this has worked out really well because sand is probably going to be too big and look a bit weird. So all I did was took the piece that I want to texture like this, and a good old can of Halford's primer or whatever grey primer you can get, give it a good shake up, clean the piece out before you start filming, Rich. And I'm hitting it with a layer of the primer so that it becomes the grey uniform colour, but also is tacky with the primer. And then I'm very quickly switching down here to a sieve and a bag of tile grout, and I'm dropping the grout into the sieve and being very messy here and giving it a light coat like this on the various different sides, and then tapping to get the rest mixed in. And then as you can see, it gives a nice kind of concretey texture. And then to make sure that you don't get loose bits flaking off, I'm then hitting it again with another layer of the primer like this. That makes it a uniform colour, and together those will bind on and give you a subtle concretey texture that really works at the tiny scale. Okay, so time to move on to the scatter pieces. So I'm going to make some craters. First of all, I will absolutely admit that I cheated and 3D printed some, but because I scaled them down, I had to print them on my resin printer in order to get them to come out nicely, and I realised that is something that definitely not a lot of people have. So we'll make our own. I'm going to base it on some chipboard. This stuff's, I've used it before on other bits. It's pretty strong and holds up really well to use and is pretty easy to get hold of. I need something to make the base frame out of to get that lip look that you get on a good crater like this one and the old GW ones from days gone by, and I'm going to make that out of green stuff. You can use any other putty, air drying clay, even toilet paper with glue. I'm just using green stuff because I need to use it up before it goes off, and it sets up firm for filming purposes. So first of all, you want to create a circle with it. Okay, lifting this up, you can see that I've pinched it up into quite a high ring, and that's because we want a real ridge on this side, because what we're aiming to create is a piece that has a slope coming up and then a sudden drop off into the crater from the blast damage. So there's a few materials that we can use here. Something that everybody will probably have access to is slate. So I've just smashed up some slate chunks from like the driveway stuff, but you get it in hobby shops and all over the place. And the idea here being you want to put it on the ridge and have it lean inwards so that you don't see under the ridge, and you get this kind of sloping effect. And then you would just stagger them around the outside like this and create that blast ring that you see with the craters where it looks like the surface has been lifted up. An alternative to using this is thinly poured plaster. Plaster of Paris will work into some kind of dish, a flat dish, and then you snap it into these pieces and you get these lovely broken concrete textures, really, really nice. So again, you'd be placing these like this. But what I'm actually going to do here is use the cork that's been left over from the piece that I cut out, because it's got a nice texture to it. When you tear it, it tears like stone and rubble and concrete, and it's going to be available because I've just chopped it out of my board. So I will finish the ring of these. Okay, and there we go. And this is a good opportunity now that we know what roughly it's going to look like, is to draw around it roughly with a pen and cut this out before you texture anything. Okay, so it's texturing time. I've got a few different textures here that I'm going to use. This is cat litter. This is a mixture of all sorts of sand and rubble and old chunks of random stuff that I've had left from the project. So I just chuck in a pot for variety. Got very fine grain like play sand stuff and some kind of ballasty rock type pieces here. And it's important that you put the textures in the right places. So I'm going to put glue in between all these broken road pieces, being careful not to get any on top because you want this to look like the road surface has been lifted up. And inside, because this is a blast that's caused this crater, it's actually going to have pushed really heavily pressured down the bottom of the crater. So in here you're going to want one or two small scattery chunks of rocks where things may have broken off and landed in there, but generally speaking this should be the sand texture to represent the impacted and crushed earth underneath. So let's get some glue on this and see how it comes out. Right, and here we have it finished. So what I've done is, as I said, kept all the fine grained sand in the middle, made sure to get it up on the edges by tilting and rotating this. Still needs dampening down a bit in the middle. If you get some of the sand doesn't want to stick to the PVA because it's soaked into the cardboard, leave a bit of it loose, and then when you spray it with a little bit of water, it'll be absolutely fine because it'll bond together. And around the edges, I've kind of made sure it goes to a soft, low profile finish so that it blends in with whatever road surface it's going to be on, because obviously this is supposed to look like debris that's scattered over onto the road, and then it will blend in with the surface better. But you get that kind of crater look, and it was pretty easy to make. So I'm going to leave this to dry overnight before I hit it with some primer, and if it does warp, as I've showed in previous videos, because the card sometimes does with a bit of PVA on top, just turn it over and paint the bottom with PVA, and it'll bend it back in the same direction again, and you'll have a nice flat crater to jazz up your roads. And after a simple grey dry brush and a brown wash, both on the outside where the dirt's gotten kicked up and right in the middle to make it look like impacted earth, we're done, and as you can see, jazzes up the board nicely. So the whole project is done. Very happy with how everything's come out. In these recesses, all I did was simply pour some resin with green ink mixed in with it, and then scattered in some random bits of flock and stones, just to give the disused, abandoned look. And overall, very happy with how everything's come out. It looks great with the models on. You get the isometric view really, really well, especially if you take a, an actual player's eye view. And overall, I think project goals definitely met. So hopefully this inspires people to try making some epic terrain of their own, or Adeptus Titanicus terrain, because these roads are exactly 120 millimeters wide, so they'll take the biggest base. And yeah, get creative. More projects coming soon.